Hey, a quick note here at the top. The Read-Aloud Revival podcast is about to go on a short break. What you've got today is episode 177. Then we're going to take a couple of months break here on the show. You can get caught up on all of our backlist episodes. There are, in fact, 177 to listen to. And then we'll be back later this summer with an excellent new podcast series for you. We're already working on it. It's super fabulous. Now, while we won't be here on the podcast, we certainly aren't going away. And we send all of our best resources, free guides, book lists, all the good stuff to our email subscribers. So if you haven't yet, be sure to hop on our email list. I send an email every Wednesday morning. You don't want to miss it. You can get those emails by heading to readaloudrevival.com/subscribe. Go ahead, do it now. readaloudrevival.com/subscribe. You're listening to the Read-Aloud Revival podcast. I'm your host, Sarah McKenzie, homeschooling mama of 6 and author of The Read-Aloud Family and Teaching from Rest. As parents, we're overwhelmed with a lot to do. It feels like every child needs something different. The good news is you are the best person to help your kids learn and grow, and home is the best place to fall in love with books. This podcast has been downloaded 7 million times in over 160 countries. So if you want to nurture warm relationships while also raising kids who love to read, you're in good company. We'll help your kids fall in love with books, and we'll help you fall in love with homeschooling. Let's get started. Science is everywhere. It's in everything we do, everything we see, and yes, everything we read. Books, in fact, offer an especially delightful opportunity to talk about science, both through their illustrations and their text. We just need to know a few things to look for and a few questions to ask. So today we're going to find out what to look for and some questions to ask. I've invited a couple of experts onto the show. One is a professor of education who specializes in teaching literacy. The other is a microbiologist who's a professor of biology. You're going to be floored when you find out how we can use the picture books we already have on our shelves to help our kids learn to think like a scientist. This is so fun. Now, before I launch into this conversation, I want you to know two things. We pretty much dive right into the meat, and you're going to hear several references to what my guests call cross-cutting concepts. There are 7 of these cross-cutting scientific concepts, and they make up the basis of scientific thinking. They are pattern, cause and effect, structure and function, scale, proportion, and quantity, systems and system models, energy and matter, and stability and change. See, science isn't about learning content. It's not about memorizing facts or learning a certain body of information and committing that to memory. In fact, my guests today say that scientists aren't smarter than everybody else. What they do instead is create a habit of mind where they ask questions based around these 7 cross-cutting scientific concepts, the ones I just mentioned. And by doing so, they think scientifically. Picture books, it turns out, are an excellent way to nurture this kind of scientific thinking in our own students. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's listen in. Dr. Valerie Bon-Jensen, Department Chair and Professor of Education at St. Michael's College in Vermont, is an expert in children's literature and literacy. Dr. Mark Lebkowitz is Chair and Professor of Biology at St. Michael's, and he's a molecular biologist. They actually started working at St. Michael's on the same day 20 years ago. But back then, they never imagined they would be pairing up to write a book. They're the co-authors of Sharing Books, Talking Science, Exploring Scientific Concepts with Children's Literature. And they're on a mission to convince everyone that scientific concepts appear everywhere in books and in our daily lives. We just need to know what to look for. So today, they're joining us to talk about using books to learn to think like a scientist. Valerie and Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Can I add one thing to the introduction, Sarah, if I may? What you would never know about Valerie from reading our website is that Valerie is, some would say blessed, some would say cursed, with synesthesia, which means that she sees letters and numbers as colors. So imagine someone who's dedicated their professional existence to literature. And when she opens up a book, what she sees is an incredible palette of colors. Like, that's not an experience I have. And what you also might not know is that Valerie and I have written 2 books together. And when we write, we're in the same room, on the same Google Doc, on a table facing each other. And I'm an atrocious speller. So Valerie will look up at me and say, Mark, there's a purple word where a yellow word should be.
That's how we wrote the book.
I am beginning to figure out that a Z or a K is a different color than a C, and so on. The other thing is that I should point out, Valerie was the recent recipient of our college's teaching award. So she is, as you might predict, really quite good at her job, and an alto singer.
And I'd like to add a little bit. You've captured the academic side of my colleague, Mark. He also loves to grow food. He has an enormous garden, a greenhouse he built himself. And what does he do with all this food? He and his wife, Ginger, invite 40 of their closest friends to dinner on the 15th of every month. If you don't know what you're doing on the 15th, you go to their house for dinner. And that is what I'm looking forward to after the pandemic is over.
I might make my way to Vermont on the 15th of the month, I'm thinking.
We had 25 years of dinner parties until the pandemic, 400 in a row.
I'll say, too, that Mark earned that teaching award long before I did. So I'm following in his footsteps.
Well, it is such a pleasure to chat with you. And we have been having fun. Our whole team has been reading your book. And I just can't wait to talk with you about the ideas in here. So maybe we can start just by defining what you mean, or talking about what you mean when you say learning to think like a scientist. So what does that mean exactly?
Let's tell them the secret first, Mark.
Well, the secret is, so scientists aren't smarter than everybody else. Scientists have just created a code, a way to classify sort of human thinking and behavior. And so one of the ideas of the cross-cutting concepts is they don't fall under the domain of science. They actually fall under the domain of humanity. And if you look at those 7 ideas, the 7 cross-cutting concepts that we call scientific thinking, they really describe just how people in general think. And so that was a real aha for us, because what that means is that everybody from your 2-year-old upwards is already thinking, walking, and talking like a scientist. And it's just about helping them realize that. And as Valerie is going to point out at some point today, that when you're writing, you're following the same schema and the same structure that scientists follow, just with a different set of vocabulary.
This all came about when I was teaching a graduate class, and there were practicing teachers who came to my class to learn about nonfiction. A lot of them knew so much about fiction and felt very comfortable with it. But as you know, Sarah, there's been a resurgence or an explosion, more likely, in nonfiction over the last 15 or 20 years. I've even listened to your interview with Barb Rosenstock, and just incredible work. And so I wanted them to see that we read books and interpret them based on our own experiences and our own education. So I invited Mark to come to class. I read aloud this beautiful picture book called Winter Barn. It's very New England. The cover is just white space, which is snow, and a red barn and a stone wall. Very quiet sort of mood. And it describes a farmer bringing the animals in for the winter and the hush that falls over everything. And I read it. It's beautiful. I asked all the teachers what they thought and what they remembered, what was their response. And they all talked about the beautiful language and how well it paired with the illustrations, and how there were, simple vocabulary, but really deep embedded words and concepts about Hessian soldiers that had built the foundation. And then I said, Mark, what did you hear?
And I said, it's a horror story. No one else in the room saw it that way. But what I heard and what I saw in the illustrations was I put all the animals in the barn into 2 categories. So some were predators and some were prey. And I knew that over the time scale of the winter, the predators, mainly the cat, was going to eat the mice, right? And so I had just a very different take on the story than everyone else. And I didn't pick up on the soldiers or the tenors and mortison. I just picked up on their predators and their prey animals, and they're interacting in a small space. So some might say that when Valerie was sharing that book with her class and I was listening, that what I was doing is I was listening like a scientist. And so that led to this conversation between the two of us. It's like, so how did you come to such a different interpretation of that story than everyone else in the room and being the only scientist in the room. And so that, of course, led to how would a scientist look at this? And so I looked at Valerie showed me the cover of the book. And so it's a picture, a bucolic barn covered in snow, right? And so right there, that's a pattern. And that pattern tells me that it's wintertime. So that's like observation number one. And I know that that pattern is going to cause the farmer to move the animals inside of that structure. So cause and effect, right? I know that the function of that structure is to protect the animals, structure function. I know that I can view that structure then as a system, right? A closed system with boundaries and energy and matter coming into it, think food and water and waste going in and out as the farmer does daily chores. Or I can think of it as a model system for the entire ecosystem of New England. And then I also know that depending upon the scale at which I examine that system. So if I look at the system over the entire winter, so I'm looking at the barn, there's a rhythm, a daily rhythm, right? The farmer brings food, it takes out water, it takes out waste, and so on. And so it's a predictable pattern. So it's a stable system. But if I change the scale and I zoom in on that moment at which the cat eats the mouse, at that point it's changing. So that's what it means to think like a scientist, or to even look at the cover of Winter Barn and to interpret the reality there.
Which makes it sound like there's so many of these layers that we have. Like when we're revisiting a book, there's always more layers for us to dive into, more things for us to uncover as we're reading. I think you even mentioned in your book, I don't remember how you both worded it, but the impression I got was not that we need to squeeze everything out of a book like we're squeezing a juice out of an orange or something, right? But that this deepens our understanding of the book, of ourselves and of the world, because we are looking at the stories from, well, I think you said this just at the top here today, Valerie, which is looking at it from your experience and from your education.
The first time someone reads a book, you just want to get out of the way. You want the author and the illustrator to connect with the reader in the way that is just going to happen and emerge for every reader. But the more that you think about this, the more you can return to a book and have conversations about these elements that really pair beautifully the scientific with the literary thing. So, for example, should we give you some examples of how okay. So, Mark keeps talking about pattern, and he's taught me it's really the superhero of science, pattern is. But if you think about a book like Brown Bear, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know that book. It's a pattern, right? Brown Bear, what do you see? I see. So within this 2 pages, the kids are chanting along with it and predicting. And that's what makes the book. But what makes it special at the end is the pattern is broken. And depending on which version you have, it's a mother looking at the children or at children instead of an animal looking at another animal. So that breaking the pattern is what makes it delightful and satisfactory. And Mark, you have a great example from the Hunger Games.
Yeah, so if you think about how the story is resolved in the first book, there's supposed to be one ultimate winner, right? So that's the pattern, that's the cause and effect, the rule. And so they throw the system into change by disrupting that pattern. So there's going to be 2 winners this year. And if you think about it, books usually start off with a stable pattern that is immediately thrown into discord. And the book is about resolving that, bring it back into either new pattern or to the old, or you start off with this disrupted system, but it's always disruption, stability, disruption. And then how dissatisfying is it when we don't get it resolved, right?
Well, so as you're talking about this, so one of the things that our community director did, and she was the first one to read your book and said, Sarah, you have got to have them on the podcast, is she took a couple of books. She took The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats, and she took Owl Moon by Jane Yolen, and she looked for all of these different cross-cutting scientific concepts in the book. And so she sent them to me and said, if you have time, it would be really fun for me to check and see if I was on the right track. So I told her I'd run her ideas by you if you're up for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's do it.
We loved those as examples too. She chose well.
Okay, let's do Owl Moon. And we actually had Jane Yolen on to talk about the making of Owl Moon, which of course happened a long time ago. It's the little girl who's on the cover of Owl Moon is now a grown woman with adult children of her own. So because the story was based on her husband taking her kids out owling. So, okay, this is what Courtney had. She said for cause and effect, which I think paired with so that's the scientific cutting concept that is paired with plot as a literary device, right? Am I understanding that right?
Yes.
Okay, so she wrote down trains and dogs, and then she wrote father and owl calling to each other.
Yeah. So the train and the dog, the train, so it's setting the stage. And in the distance, they hear a train whistle and they hear a dog howling back at the train. So the dog howling was the effect caused by it hearing the train. So she nailed that one.
Good job, Court.
And in the middle of that book, there's a really nice double page spread of, it's an aerial view of the owl landing. And so you can see a branch. And then below that is the father and daughter. And it whispers cause and effect, because an effect is something you can see or measure. So you can see the owl coming in, and which you can't hear, but you can imply it is they were just going, hoo, 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 right? So that's the cause.
Yes. Okay. So then for pattern, which patterns, again, the scientific concept that goes along with genre, that's what I have as
It's
note.
one way that it does. I mean,
okay.
To take a detour from Owl Moon for a minute,
Yeah.
How do we know a folktale when we see one?
Oh,
it has certain elements.
Time?
It has elements in it, right? It might have talking animals. It might, be very simple, not much character development. So we know it's a folktale. We know a fable, the pattern of a fable is it has a lesson, right?
Yeah, moral at the end.
Like science fiction always asks what if. So genre is a pattern.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
right?
I see.
But I think
the structure of the books themselves, whether they're chapters or in a lot of picture books, they're in units of 8 pages, which is a pattern really of printing more than anything else.
But I think in Owl Moon, let's think about that, the pattern. I actually know this family, and I know that when each child was old enough, the child went out with their dad, David, to go owling, and the conditions had to be right. They had to follow. They wouldn't go out in pouring rain, probably, right? So the pattern of that event, we can see that. There might be certain times of the year that you would go owling. That's a pattern.
Okay.
Cause and effect relationships can be patterns. In this case, it is a pattern, right? So the owl responds to that sound.
Oh,
it's
right.
It's not going to respond to it. It's going to respond to hoo, 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 but it's not going to respond to caw,
Yes. Okay. Yeah, she has noted footprints and shadows bumping along. She noted what you just said, Valerie, about the brothers have already gone owling and the little sister had to wait as a note under systems, the systems that are in place.
Family system.
Yeah, and the family is a system, right?
And every system has boundaries. In this case, it is the familial boundary. And then the interacting components are the parents and the offspring.
Interesting. Okay.
Did she tackle stability and change?
Yes, she did. She wrote moonlight, shadows in trees, clearing.
So here's the thing about stability and change that is really, really fascinating, is that it's really all about scale, right? So what does an owl do all night long? It lands, it takes off, it lands, it takes off, it lands, it takes off. So over the scale of like 12 hours of nighttime, that's a normal behavioral pattern, right? There's nothing that's very stable. But if you change the time scale and you ask this very second, what is the owl doing? If it's landing, well, it's changing, right? And so I always like to say, if you were a Martian scientist and you only came to Earth once every century to measure humans and see what they're doing, you would conclude that they're dying. Like that's what they do, right? But if you change your time scale and you came in and you said, I'm going to measure every year or every decade or every hour, you'd get a very different result.
Yes.
So all of us are always stable and changing depending upon the scale at which you're looking.
I'm just like mind blown over here. That's amazing. Okay. For energy, she has, if you go owling, you have to be quiet and make your own heat.
Aha, good for her. Yeah, heat is definitely one type of energy, and that's totally right. We could also think about, so I'm not a scientist. I never trained as a scientist, and I needed a lot of help when we got going. And I said, Mark, when I buy a new device, I just go right to the quick start. I don't want to read all the directions. So I need a quick start to help me find the concepts. And one that was really hard for me was energy and matter. So Mark, what's a quick start question to help us think about energy here? Let's take the owl. The owl is flying all night.
Okay. So for biological systems, the energy is always going to be, whatever they ate. So chemical energy. And then the way it manifests is sound, heat, motion. So if the owl is flying, that's energy like in action right there. And then when the owl is landing, there's energy being dissipated. The sound coming out of the father and the daughter, that's energy, right? That's their breakfast leaving their body in another form. Or probably their ice cream sundae they had before they headed out or whatever. Hot chocolate.
I also think that books offer a chance to see time as a scale also. So you mentioned the snowy day earlier. Peter goes out by himself for maybe an hour, maybe half an hour. And the whole book takes place in that time frame. But then you take something like Percy Jackson or Harry Potter, where a whole year goes by with every book. And so kids get a sense of scale. Did it happen in a moment? Is it last stop on Market Street, which is just one bus ride long, versus decades or years?
And losing it, like one of my favorite examples is losing it too. That's a pattern that you anticipate. But on the day that happens, when you zoom in and change the scale, that's not just part of a pattern. That's a momentous event because you change scale.
The scale is interpreted, the importance of each event, I guess, is interpreted based on the scale that we're talking about. Because whether it's this week in the life of this, we have a picture book biography we've been reading lately called, just brand new. It's called Mornings with Monet. And it's just, the whole story just takes place before breakfast. From the time he wakes up, in the last page is when he's eating breakfast. And then you can read another picture book biography about another illustrator or artist that takes place from the time they're It Began with a Page, which is a picture book biography about Gyo Fujikawa, and takes place from the time she was little until her death, And so the moments in the story reflect whether they're climactic or not, just really depends on the scale of time that you're talking about then, right?
The author zooms in and zooms out. And when they zoom in, it's like, pay attention. And now I'm going to fast forward through 3 months and then pay attention again to this hour or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of picture book artists do this anyway, where they will have panels or boxes, and then there will be a double page spread that sort of says to you, slow down and look at this, something big is happening. So if you go back to that picture that Mark was describing, where the owl is about to land because the dad has called it in, and you see these talons come out. And so if you think about the physical properties of the talons and their shape, they're going to help it grip the limb that it's landing on.
They're not like dental floss, right? Because they have to, and that their shape is going to be able to make a circle. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to grab prey or even a limb.
Yeah, this is fun because with my younger students, we were just doing a whole unit on birds, and we were talking about how you can look at a bird's beak and you can tell just by the beak, the function of the beak is what they eat, right? So you can tell by looking at a bird's beak pretty much what they eat. You can deduce just looking at the shape of the beak. Or the talons, same thing, is like, what do they hop around on the ground, or do they need to cling to a branch or swoop down and grab a fish from the river?
So this kind of leads me into the other idea that we had, and that is that some books are just right in your face. They shout a scientific concept. And so, for example, Sneed B. Collard's book, Beaks, is a book that shouts about structure and function. What do you do with a tale like this? I mean, it shouts structure and function. There's a great book called Bridges Are to Cross by Sturgis. So that's structure and function in the engineered world, where you're building something to solve a problem. Oh, and Gail Gibbons too. We call her Gail Systems Gibbons, because all of her books are about systems, the components, how they interact. But one of the things our editor said to us is, don't tell me which books I have to read. I want to be able to pull any book off the shelf and see the concepts in there. Help me do this. Once you know them, it's kind of like your training wheels. Use shout books. And then once you start to see the concepts, then you take off the training wheels and you start to see them everywhere. So for example, the snowy day.
I love the cover because Peter's looking over his right shoulder and he's looking at his footprint in the snow, right? And so that's an effect. And you can just tell that he's pondering the cause. And he's just totally mystified by the fact that he made an impression in the snow. So it's just whispering to you cause and effect.
And now it's not shout, because it's not about that. It's not about cause and effect. You're just watching it happen.
find these concepts whispering everywhere. Structure and function in the Three Little Pigs, right? Only one house, the house, which was the function, served to keep them safe from the wolf because the structure was made of brick, right?
I have never thought about books this way, and it's so much fun. It's going to be so fun to uncover all this.
It's a new way of thinking, and then it just becomes the way that you think.
To me, it's part of that lifelong journey of trying to understand humanity. Our brains put pattern on everything. That's just what defines humanity. That's what makes us, what we can do better than every other animal out there is recognize patterns. I mean, what is language? Pattern recognition. What is behavior? Pattern recognition.
We started off with a little story in our book about a second and third grade teacher named Callie. And she was great. She invited us to observe in her class over the year, and she would try out our ideas. And she had talked a lot with her class about cause and effect and structure and function. And she was reading Charlotte's Web. And she was, at the part where Charlotte decides she can save Wilbur by spinning words in the web. And, it's this little moment where no one else in the barn is awake, and Charlotte is weaving the web and coaching herself through it with a little kind of song. And one of her students said, I bet she's using a different kind of thread for the words than she is for the rest of the web. And then Callie said to the student, what makes you think so? And he said, well, it has to be a different kind of thread because it's a different purpose. She shouldn't use the sticky ones because it would make flies stick in the word. And, what we all realized when we heard that was that this child was applying his understanding of structure and function to help enrich this part of this book. It was just amazing. So he was taking that lens with him everywhere. And, one thing that Mark, who teaches labs, he would never say, don't do hands-on inquiry science with children. They need that, right? But they can't get all of science from a book, but they can launch these ideas into every part of their life. And books are a perfect place to do that because books are life. They're a little microcosm of life.
In our book, we wrote everything you need to know about structure and function you can learn from the paperclip. So if you can imagine a paperclip in your mind, so you know what it looks like. So let's start with, so Valerie, what's a paperclip do? What's its function?
I think you should ask Sarah.
Okay, Sarah, what's a paperclip do?
It holds things together, papers together.
Now watch this. Describe the shape for me. What does this paperclip look like?
Rounded, oblong.
Okay, now watch this. What the audience can't see is I've just changed the shape of the paperclip and I've straightened it. So Sarah, will this still hold paper?
No, it will not.
It will not. So I changed the shape and therefore I changed the function. Now this part you have to do in your mind, but now let's just say that I were to make the perfect paper clip out of a piece of string. Would it hold paper?
No, even though it's the right shape.
Yes, it would not. Correct. So shape matters, but the physical property matters also. So it has to be the right shape. It has to be the right physical properties. And so just, I teach molecular genetics, and I just did that exact demo with my students when I was talking about protein structure function, because it's just a guiding principle. Shape matters, physical property matters, whether you're talking about a paperclip or a molecule.
I wish I had taken science classes from you. I think I would have understood them a lot better than I did.
Well, and that's exactly the point that we like to make, is that a lot of us took science classes and content was the boss. We just had to memorize, and it's impossible to memorize everything. But if you have this schema, you just plug things in. The other thing, getting back to structure and function, I think kids have a lot of fun thinking about the structure and function of the physical book. So if you take a book like Lois Ehlert, where she has the cutouts, the structure is there to enable the function, which is you can see pages that are behind it that are different colors. Or if you get to a gatefold page, that structure enables you to be incredibly impressed, or see a whole spread of, a landscape that was just too big for a regular double page spread. So that's a lot of fun too, to think about. Why is this book Gail Gibbons wrote on skyscrapers tall and narrow? Or Hello Lighthouse, why is it tall and narrow? I had a friend who started a goat farm. She took over a farm that was monocropped. And she said, do you know a plant biologist? And I said, actually, I do. So I arranged to take Mark out to meet my friend Karen. And I was about to explain what they each wanted to. And like within 2 minutes, they were off and running, talking, because they could speak the same kind of concepts.
So I know nothing, at the time I knew nothing about goats. In fact, I didn't even know that goats are browsers, not grazers. And browsers eat ends of branches and grazers eat grass. So I thought they were grazers, not, okay. So I didn't even know that, but I knew the questions to ask. So what's your system? What's the pattern of your system? What's the pattern that you're trying to disrupt? So what's stable and what's changing? Tell me about the cause and effect relationships. And then let's look at energy and matter. What are the levers that you can pour into that system to drive change and to get to the pattern that you want to get to? And then part of that, solving that problem, will be structure and function. And that's true if you go to any science conference, you don't have to know all the content because it's impossible to know it all. But when you meet someone, what's your system? What are you measuring? And there's always the same 7 questions. And so it's empowering because you don't have to go and memorize all that content. It just falls in place because it follows a pattern itself.
Okay, so then our kids then learn to speak the language of science. And this is really empowering, I think, for a lot of our listeners are homeschoolers. And one of the things I hear from a lot of homeschooling families is, I've got a kid who's really into science and I'm not really into science. And I don't know if I have what I need to equip them, but by empowering them to think like a scientist, we're preparing them then to do science at any level in the future.
Yes, that is exactly right. In fact, the quick start questions that we use in our book, and we wrote for K through 8 teachers, I use in my college classes because the relevance of them never goes away.
Now it's time to hear from the kids. They'll tell us about the books they've been loving lately.
Hi, my name is Karina Tung, and I'm 7 years old and live in Los Angeles, California. My favorite book right now is Journey to America, Escaping the Holocaust to Freedom by Sonia Levitin. The book is based on the author's own life fleeing Germany as a child. I think it's a really good story because they never gave up. My favorite part is the ending, but I don't want to spoil it for you.
Hi, my name is Hans Tung, and I'm 9 years old, and I'm from Los Angeles, California. My favorite books right now are the Christian Heroes Then and Now series. These are true stories of really brave men and women who went all over the world to share about God's love, and sometimes they were even killed for following and obeying Jesus. These stories make me braver and not take my faith for granted. I hope you can read them and be inspired too.
Hi, my name is Greta Patterson. I'm 11 and I live in Washington State. My favorite book is Keeper of the Lost Cities, Book 7, Flashback. I love the complex storyline and the characters are very fun and easy to relate with.
Hi, my name is Caleb. I am 10 years old and I live in Massachusetts. One of the books I've been enjoying lately is Mrs. Piggle Wiggle because the parents call a lot of people, but they can't solve the problem, so they call Mrs. Piggle Wiggle.
Hi, my name is Liam and I'm 8 years old and live in Texas. My favorite book is Who Was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart? I like it because I love classical composers and their music, and one of my favorites is Mozart.
Hi, my name's Will. I'm 12 years old and I live in Port Kembla, Australia. My favourite book series is The Hunger Games because they keep you on the edge of your seat and they tell a really good story.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm 10 years old and I live in Port Kembla, Australia. My favourite book is the Harry Potter series because there's something exciting in every chapter.
What's your name?
Archie.
And how old are you, Archie?
6 years old.
Where do you live?
Port Kembla, Australia.
What's your book?
Harry Potter.
And why do you like the Harry Potter books?
Because Ron and Hermione and Harry have great adventures. Bye.
What's your name?
Ada.
And how old are you, Ada?
3 years old.
And where do you live?
Port Kembla, Australia.
What book do you like?
Peppa Pig.
Peppa Pig Nursery Rhymes?
Yeah.
And why do you like that book?
Because Peppa Pig season had a little lamb.
Mary had a little lamb. Thanks, Ada.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I am 8 years old, and I live in Colorado. My favorite book is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. It gives an interesting and realistic perspective of life during the Civil War.
My name is Silas. I'm 9 years old. My home state is Oregon. The book I like best would be The Flying Dragon Room by Audrey Wood. I like it because I like the rooms that Patrick makes.
What's your name? How old are you? Where are you from? What's your favorite book? The Fierce Yellow Pumpkin. Can you say by Margaret Wise Brown? Very good. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nathan. I'm from South Carolina. I'm 8 years old. My favorite book is Magic Treehouse, and why is because I like all the adventures. Hello, my name is Abigail Blakely. I'm from Taylor, South Carolina. I love the Serafina series because I love the adventure and I love the heartbreak and everything else about the series.
Thank you so much, kids. Wasn't that a fun episode? I really enjoyed my conversation with Valerie and Mark. We will have links in the show notes to their books. The one we talked about today was Sharing Books, Talking Science. They also have one called Books in Bloom. We'll put links to all that in the show notes, as well as links to the books we mentioned today, the books that shout and a few that whisper. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're taking a short break just here on the podcast, not in our creation of really awesome resources, definitely not at RAR Premium. We've got a great lineup ahead. In fact, in May, speaking of science, our picture book that we are reading as our family book club is called Nature's Friend, and it's a picture book biography about the artist Gwen Frostick, who was inspired by nature a whole lot in her art. And it's a really beautiful picture book biography all about a Michigan artist. We've also invited Cindy West to come and lead us in a literary nature study workshop. So this is really fun if you're into nature study or trying to get your family into nature study, trying to maybe start the habit of noticing and appreciating nature on a different level. We are pairing up nature study with books here at Read-Aloud Revival. So Cindy is coming. She's going to lead us in a family nature study workshop that goes right along with our family book club picks. So, I mean, books, nature, happy, all kinds of happy, right? We're doing all of that in RAR Premium. As always, you can find out what's coming next in RAR Premium and give it a whirl. We have a 30-day money-back guarantee, which means that you can join RAR Premium, no risk. You can just see if it's a good fit for you. And if not, you can always request a refund within 30 days. But we're betting it's going to be a good fit. And we've got some really excellent lineups of family book clubs, WOW Writers on Writing workshops, and homeschool trainings for you so that you can teach with less stress and more rest. And that's all at rarpremium.com. In the meantime, you know what to do. Go make meaningful and lasting connections with your kids through books. So many of us feel overwhelmed in our homeschool. There's a lot to do, and it feels like every child needs something a little different. The good news is, you are the best person on the planet to help your kids learn and grow, and home is the best place to fall in love with books. I'm Sarah Mackenzie. I'm a homeschooling mother of 6, the author of Teaching from Rest and the Read-Aloud Family, and I'm the host here on the Read-Aloud Revival podcast. This podcast has been downloaded over 8 million times. And you know, I think it's because so many of us want the same things. We want our kids to be readers, to love reading. We want our homes to be warm and happy havens of learning and connection. We know that raising our kids is the most important work of our lives. That's kind of overwhelming, right? You are not alone. In Read-Aloud Revival Premium, we offer family book clubs, a vibrant community, and Circle with Sarah, coaching for you, the homeschooling mom, so you can teach from rest, homeschool with confidence, and raise kids who love to read. Our family book clubs are a game changer for your kids' relationship with books. We provide you with a family book club guide and an opportunity for your kids to meet the author or illustrator live on screen. So all you have to do is get the book, read it with your kids, and make those meaningful and lasting connections. They work for all ages, from your youngest kids to your teens. Every month, our community also gathers online for a Circle with Sarah to get ideas and encouragement around creating the homeschooling life you crave. They're the most effective way I know to teach from rest and build a homeschool life you love. We want to help your kids fall in love with books, and we want to help you fall in love with homeschooling. Join us today at RARpremium.com.